Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Turin here, and today, guys, I'm here with Italian Spartacus, and we are going to talk about Total Warhammer 2 and do some baseless speculation on what the factions could be.
Hey guys, how's it all going?
So, essentially, this Friday, which is going to be March 31st, Creative Assembly, they do have the countdown timer on the website on the Coming Soon section that is essentially articulating that they're going to announce at least some of the factions, if not all, for the upcoming Total Warhammer 2 game. So, pretty exciting stuff. All we really have to go off is indeed the splash screen, and I have no idea what that is because I don't really know anything about the lore, but you have some
Mhm.
speculations, my friend?
I do. So I'd say like the mainstream consensus amongst most people is that that is a splash screen for Lustria. And Lustria is in the New World. So if you're looking at a map of the Warhammer world, or Malice as it's called, you've got the New World, which is literally North and South America. It looks almost exactly like our map with a slight askew. Florida's not there. That's like the only
That's
thing
good.
different.
That's good.
Yeah, we're gonna say it, which is a blessing. Um, and then the old world looks exactly like Europe, Asia, and not South America, Africa.
Hmm.
Um, so the old world is where we've been playing so far. It's in the north. It's literally the Western European world with the western portion of Russia and like Finland and Sweden up there. So and Albion, which is essentially Britain.
Hmm.
But that's the old world. That's what we've been playing. That's where the Empire is, Bretonia, the vampire counts. Everyone's there. Now, south of the old world, and if you look at like the Badlands is right where the very bottom of this world currently goes to in our campaign map.
Yes.
South of that is the land of the dead, and that's where Khemri is, and that's where the Tomb Kings are.
Okay.
Then south, like even further south, is the Southlands, which is probably the most creative name you can think of.
That sounds wonderful.
But that the Southlands used to be connected to Lustria because all of the Warhammer world used to be basically like one giant Pangea, so one big, huge, giant supercontinent.
Yes.
And Slan, who are the basically the leaders of the Lizardmen, split the world into separate continents. And in the New World, North America is basically controlled by the Dark Elves, and in the South America, you've got literally called the steaming jungles of Lustria, and that's
So
filled with lizardmen, with Skaven, and with vampire counts.
okay, got
But
it. So the Southlands, essentially, if we were to be on the campaign map where we're playing, the Greenskins and the Bloody Hands, our co-op campaign right now, if you were to go just south of that, that would then take you to the Southlands and through the Land of the Dead. So that is that where the Tomb Kings would reside if we were to get them?
yeah, and that's kind of where I'm. A lot of people have like the speculation that Kings are going to be in Warhammer has been around for a really long time. Um, People have been saying it since like the game first came out. Oh, don't worry, Tomb Kings are around the corner. It makes the most sense. X, Y, and Z. So, if I were to look at this as from a game developer, and I wanted to keep it on the same campaign map that is currently there, just basically extending it south, I would put the Tomb Kings in there because they would be your stopgap in between the Badlands and the Southlands.
Hmm.
There's the Marches of Madness, but that's not really consequential. And then the Southlands would be your you could have Skaven down there. It would be Lizardmen, and you would have Dark Elves down there, maybe, and High Elves. So pretty much everything would be in that southern continent. Even though the majority of those three factions, High Elves, Dark Elves, and Lizardmen, are on the other continent.
Okay, got it. So essentially, going from north to south, we would have again the Greenskins and the Badlands territory. Then just south
Mhm.
of that, like you were mentioning, the stopgap essentially would be the Tomb Kings. And then if we were to go even further south past the Tomb Kings, would we then come across the Lizardmen? You were saying?
Yes, yeah, if we go further south, because there's one like major city. What's it called? It's like I want to call it like because all of the Lizardmen, not economy, but their culture is based off of like Aztecs and Mayans. So they all have very similar names for all their cities. Like one is Itza,
Yeah,
Itza,
yeah.
Zahotl, which Xhotl. But there's one really big one in the Southlands called Zlatlan. So that's probably where you might start if you were to start in the Southland as Lizardmen.
Interesting. So you're thinking that the splash screen that we've seen may indeed be that area?
I think so because it would make the most sense to put all of if we're doing four races, I'm going to say Skaven and Lizardmen. Done,
Yes.
hands down. Obviously, we're going to get Lizardmen. And if we did Skaven and Dark Elves, because I'd say Dark Elves is another one of the pretty widely regarded races that are going to be in this.
Yes.
It would have to be in the Southlands. You wouldn't be able to have the Tomb Kings in Lustria. The only other vampires or undead that are in Lustria is the Vampire Coast, which is like led by a blood dragon vampire, and which is not a Tomb King at all. So,
Got it.
well, while I want it to be Lustria, I don't think it's going to make the most sense to put those other factions there that wouldn't make sense. I guess though, if you wanted to do 4 factions and you didn't do Skaven and you didn't do Tomb Kings and you did Chaos Demons, then it would make a lot of sense again. Because the Dark Elves are up north, Skaven Clan Pestilence is there, and you've also got the Lizardmen. That's basically the height, not the height, but the majority of their race is in Lustria.
Okay, got it. Yeah, that'll be interesting to see if they decide to go to the direction of the Tomb Kings. But I mean, essentially, from what we have seen, we definitely have a confirmation that it's going to be Lizardmen based on the ziggurat that we had seen in the landscape. So.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
What's like a brief overview of the Lizardmen? Because I actually know absolutely nothing about them. Like, are they an evil faction? And what's their role in the old world?
They're kind of like chaotic neutral, might be the best way to describe them. They kind of fuck some shit up. Like,
yeah, they handle business. Just get all.
They certainly do. I mean,
yeah,
they're in the tabletop. They're pretty cool. They're a very unique army in the sense they don't necessarily play like a horde army or a shooty army or a tanky army like the dwarves or stuff like that. All of their units are pretty diverse. The lore of the Lizardmen themselves, like where they come from, they're basically there's these fathers of the Warhammer world called the Old Ones. They create all the races. Well, they create they've got their Slan, which are Slann. They're giant toad mages. Think of it that way, just big fat.
Oh,
toad.
dude, I hope we get some giant sausage toad mages.
Oh, dude, it's just like the dwarves. They're on these fat palantirs, and they're just carted around by like other lizardmen, and they just sit there and just like eat other creatures, just like Jabba the Hutt.
Oh,
dude.
that's so great. Oh man.
Yeah.
I hope
Like in the End Times books, when they talk about like trying to evacuate some of these temple cities, they say like, oh, a lot of the Slan were killed because they couldn't make the preparations to prepare their best food.
They just had to leave them behind.
Yeah, dude, they're just like these fat slobs, but
that's great.
They're also the best mages in the game. Like,
so what lore magic do they use?
Everything. The only things that other races don't use are the orc lores. Big Wog and Little Wog, but they use every other magic in the game.
Interesting. So yeah, they'll probably maybe like the Empire in Total War Warhammer could potentially have like a very diverse mage roster, because when you're playing like Empire, for example, you have access to like shadows, you have access to life, fire, light, heavens, all that kind of stuff. So perhaps they could be something similar, perhaps with some new lores of magic. You're thinking?
Well, if they add in Dark Elves, they would have the Dark Magic lore. Which is, that's a creative name for the Dark Elves.
Yeah, it's great.
And guess what? If they do High Elves, it's called High Magic. But and High Magic is like one of the strongest magics in the game. Like, picking a High Elf and you taking High Magic, that's like a done deal. Like your army's gonna be badass for that point.
Yeah, it's pretty staple, right?
Solid, as they call it. But they're not really inherently good or evil. They're following, like I was saying, the Old Ones. They had this great plan before the Old Ones left. So they do whatever is in line with that plan. So they might have a huge army that's like poised to wipe out an Empire settlement, but the slightest like gust of wind could move a blade of grass that the Slan goes, this has changed in the plan. They're really, really weird in their kind of like diplomacy, because initially they start off extremely hostile to the Elves, but the Elves are what helped them fight back the demon incursion in the very beginning of the world, but they also help the Elves too. So it's hard to say which side of the line the Lizardmen fall on, because they're so, again, chaotic neutral. They're always causing a ruckus, but they're always kind of trying to do what's right for the world as a whole. So they're always that neutral playing.
Yeah, so they're kind of like an ancient guardian. Yeah, I mean, more neutral, kind of keeping a balance type thing. Yeah,
spot on. Like they were created by the Old Ones to defend against demons, and in the End Times, they it's kind of weird because the End Times is so shitty, but
like hate that.
Yeah, dude, Age of Shitmar just ruined it. But basically, all the Slan, which are these like really amazing mages that have control over the very world of Malice. They, like I said, they split the continents asunder to separate them and bring the planet closer to the sun to warm it, because it used to be a giant ice planet. So that's how much power these guys have.
Yeah.
The most powerful one. Oh, what's his name? I want to say it's Lord.
Just Lord Lizard.
Lord Tipsy Toes. It's Lord Croak. Kroak.
Oh yeah, that's great, Lord Croak.
Dude, he's a
man.
giant mummified slan, and basically when shit starts to go awry, he wills himself back to life.
So what does he look like aesthetically? Like I've seen some like topical pictures, just from my peripheral research. Just that the Lizardmen, of course, are very reptilian, but like the Slan, like are they also like that, or do they kind of have more of a distinct look themselves?
They're more. The best way to describe a Slan in comparison to the other Lizardmen is they're more slimy. Like they have big bloated bellies.
So they're more like primordial.
Yeah, huge heads. They have like typical like frog-like appendages, very thin, with like the little sucker cups on their fingers and feet. They look like giant toads. It's not an exaggeration at all.
Nice. So how are they like in terms of combat? I mean, obviously based on what you just articulated, they're extremely powerful. But if they were to translate that to, let's say, the Total War Warhammer, the game we're playing,
right.
How would they be able to kind of scale that power? Do you think there's some like weaker variants of them, or something they could perhaps is Lord Croak just? Granted, they did kind of scale Archaon in that way, because again, correct me if I'm wrong, Archaon is extremely strong in the lore, correct?
Yeah, but like Lord Croak is one of those kind of things where, like, if you're a big fan of Lord of the Rings, like a Tom Bombadil,
okay,
he's the strongest guy in the land, but he doesn't do anything because he knows he's the strongest guy in the land.
Sure.
If they were to put Lizardmen heroes into this game, they'd probably put Lord Mazdamundi, which is a giant Slan mage priest on top of a giant Stegodon, but they probably wouldn't put him on that.
I hope they do. That sounds awesome.
Dude, Stegodons are rad, and because it's like every kid's dream when they're growing up in like the like 90s, early millennium is like dude, dinosaurs with like things on their head that shoot lasers. Yeah. That's kind of like the Lizardmen. They have these dinosaurs that are like crudely outfitted with weaponry to be like just these beasts of war.
I love it, man. I really hope we get that. And I mean, yeah, that'll be pretty interesting. I mean, I'm sure we'll have some pretty heavily armored war beasts in the Lizardmen roster. I'm hoping, right?
Yeah, because the Lizardmen are pretty much split up into like 4 races: Slan, Saurus, Skinks, and Croxigars. To put it really easily, think of Croxigars as the equivalent of giant not trolls, but like giant ass lizards that are a little more sentient. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Saurus are like big. You can almost kind of look at them as a comparison to greenskins, because Saurus are kind of like orcs, and the older the Saurus, the more like kind of like a black orc, a little bit more badass, a little bit more aggressive, stronger, tougher scales, so they have better armor saves.
Okay.
And Skinks are kind of like goblins in the sense that they are skirmishers. They're cheap units, but they're range units, and they do a lot of the quick lightning strike type stuff, like attack and run type maneuvers is more like what Skinks do. All their stuff is poisoned because it's like all like jungle and Aztec Mayan themed.
Yeah, that makes sense. So in some ways, it's somewhat comparable to the Beastmen as well, who have like the Ungors, and then they have the Gore herds. The more kind of alpha of the herd. So it's kind of cool.
It's kind of, I guess you could kind of say that they're kind of like Beastmen in their architect, like not their architecture, but like their hierarchy of society.
Yes,
they're kind of like Greenskin in their overall dispersal of races, because Beastmen and Greenskin are some of the few more diverse, quote unquote, factions or races of Warhammer. Because orcs and goblins are orcs, goblins, squigs, trolls, giants. You've got a lot in there. Yeah. Lizardmen have all 4 of those races I just mentioned, but also they have more of like the structure of like an empire. Like they actually have a Lizardman empire, as well as like structured cities and everything. They have language. They write everything down. They speak to each other. So more of a civilized, quote unquote, civilized culture.
That's going to be fun. We'll definitely have to do a co-op campaign with those guys. And as far as like, tabletop goes, like I know you kind of briefly touched upon their tabletop armies, but is there like kind of a focal strategy, or again, just like their races are diverse, do they have a very diverse tabletop presence? Are they very aggressive and headstrong? Do they skirmish more? Like what would be your, just basic kind of a summary of that?
They have really solid infantry.
Are they heavily armored?
Well, you see, the interesting thing about them is like they don't use armor. Yeah, they use scaly skins, moisturizers. Yeah. They have really high leadership. They cause I don't know if they actually cause fear. I think the Saurus cause fear. Someone can weigh in on the comments and tell me if they do or don't. I can't remember.
Yeah.
But next to Chaos Warriors, they are like the best rank and file core choice you could get, because I mean they are all very strong. They have really good base. They have a 5+ armor save, which is pretty damn good for base core units, because their cost effectiveness at that range, their point range, is pretty great.
Yeah.
And you can give them shields, and they're even more of a beast. But the cool thing about them too is, or the one shitty thing about them is, they in the tabletop they have an initiative of 1, meaning they take forever to actually hit shit. So you could charge them, and then you could kill them off before they even get a chance to attack you. But
Interesting.
For the most part, they have a bunch of different types of infantry units with large monstrous units. They've got some flyers in there to kind of mimic, like the Hawk Riders. They've got skinks on these pterodactyls, literally shooting bows and arrows.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Man, that sounds like fun.
They have something similar to an Arachnarok with a Stegodon, like I was saying. The Kroxigars play very similar. Kroxigars play very similar to Trolls, both better leadership. So they have a lot of different elements from a lot of different other armies. They're probably one of the less popular of the tabletop armies.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So would you say that, I mean, it sounds like, just based on what you just kind of, gave me, that, they're going to have a fairly strong infantry core with, very, very strong monstrous units. So in many ways, it sounds kind of similar to like what we see in Chaos and Total War Warhammer right now. Because again, Chaos granted, I don't think their infantry is the strongest. Foot Squires can obviously beat Chaos Warriors, which again is a little absurd in many senses. But regardless, they're going to try and go that same direction, perhaps, with like a very strong infantry core, just very resilient. And then, of course, having, a very strong monstrous presence, kind of like similar to the Dragon Ogre Shaggoths and, the Mance cores and things like that, would you say?
Absolutely. And the only real big difference is they're going to actually have, well, Chaos Knights are very strong. So they also have Cold One Cavalry, which is lizards on top of lizards. And they're pretty great too. And I would say their limit, like what they lack the most, is in ranged.
Yeah, just like Chaos, actually. Yeah,
exactly. By comparison, Chaos doesn't have like any range except for their Marauders on horses.
Yeah,
but these guys actually have these little skinks I was talking about. They're little skirmishers that like chuck javelins.
Yeah, that'll be pretty fun, man. I'm excited to see how they play out. And as far as like the lore, like who are their main enemies? Like who do they just get into mad cockfights with and just, go all lizard on? And I mean, who would you say are their primary, nemesis, I suppose?
So the fun thing about Lustria is kind of like the Amazon in like the Age of Discovery,
yes,
where everyone's trying to plunder it. And then like, people mysteriously get just killed off in droves. But their main opponent would be Skaven.
Yes.
In the end times, Skaven is what pretty much like leads to the Lizardmen almost being wiped out.
Got it. So, like, logistically speaking, it would make sense for Skaven to be, the secondary, or not secondary, but one of the 4 factions in this next game. Because, again, they are kind of the arch nemesis of the Lizardmen, essentially.
Right. And they do have a presence on Lustria, because that one of the Skaven clans, Pestilence, is on Lustria. That's where it comes from. With all the plague monks are in Lustria. But they move over, of course, to the new world. Or, I'm sorry, the old world as well.
Got it.
Skaven are literally fucking everywhere.
And for those of the folks on the channel who aren't terribly familiar with the Skaven, may not have played tabletop before, like, could you give us a brief overview of like who the Skaven are, like what's their role in the old world? And they're kind of like the Empire. I played a little bit of Vermintide myself, so I have a basic topical understanding that kind of the Empire and all these other factions, it's kind of like a conspiracy theory. It's like chemtrails, or people don't believe they actually exist, right?
Yeah, and you'll notice in a lot of stuff in the game as it is right now. I talk about this in one of my co-op or single player campaigns, that it'll talk about disappearing populace and say that they found a triangle symbol, which is the symbol of Skaven. So they're talking about Skaven, which do this. They appear and kill off populations. They steal people for experiments and stuff like that. Skaven are really fun because they're kind of like mad scientists. Whereas orcs are funny and goofy and don't take themselves seriously. Skaven are funny and goofy because they take themselves seriously.
And they're rats.
Yeah, they're giant rat men. That's the most important thing.
Yeah, that's pretty key there, right? I would imagine. So
Oh
yeah.
yeah.
So I mean, if we see Skaven, again from my little research I've done, there's different clans, right? So how do you think they would incorporate that in Total War Warhammer? Would it be kind of like a Skaven United type thing, or in
Yeah.
the campaign, like they would probably just have a few units from each of the different clans that would then compromise an entire roster. So what are those clans?
Yes, because in the way the tabletop works is the Skaven are united, and
Mm.
you'd play, okay, maybe my warlord is from Clan Eshin, which is one of the four great clans. There are four great clans. There's a ton of other clans, but there's Eshin, Molder, Pestilence, and Skryre, or Skryre. I'm not sure how it's pronounced, but Skryre. And each one of those clans is better at one thing than the other. So you can say, okay, my lord is from Clan Eshin, thus the special unit that is associated with Clan Eshin is now taken as a core unit rather than a special. So I don't see them doing that in Total Warhammer. I just see them being units you can recruit, because it's kind of the same way with Chaos. You can just recruit willy-nilly. It doesn't matter.
And how do they play on tabletop? I mean, because again, you would think like the rat people, they're kind of cunning and deceptive and lurking in the underways, and I mean, but again, they do have some like pretty powerful infantry, correct, with like the rat ogres and things like that. But on tabletop, how do they play?
So they kind of play similar to the greenskins and to undead, in the sense that they're whore, not whore. Whoops. No one wants to pay for a Skaven whore, but horde armies, in the sense that they have got really cheap core units that you can just buy tons of and muck up and tar pit other units, other armies, more expensive units, to then flank them with your expensive units or your powerful characters. They have pretty powerful characters, especially if they've got Grey Seers, which are pretty powerful mages. They've got Storm Vermin, which are they're basically like the equivalent of Black Orcs. They're armored from literally from head to tail. They carry giant glaives.
Yeah.
They have a lot of really cool technology. That's like the cool thing behind Skaven, is they have this weird like it's typically called Warp Lock is their technology name, but it's all based off of Warpstone. And Skavens are addicted to it like cocaine, like meth. It's ridiculous. They're like, gotta get the Warpstone. Yeah. It's ridiculous. It's really funny and kind of plays a really kind of quirky sense of humor with the whole army. But like they have all this crazy stuff. Like they've got these giant, I think it's warp lightning cannons or warp cannons. And warp lightning cannon, that's what. And these things basically like shoot giant condensed energy balls from Warpstone, but they can explode at any second. Or they've got Gatling guns, which again could backfire and start shooting into their own units, because they have to be put within clan rats, which are like 6-point or 4-point units in the tabletop. So they're really inexpensive. You can buy tons of them, just like Goblin Spearmen, and you would just throw them at the enemy to basically weigh them down to get your heavier hitters in there. They've got those rat ogres you brought up. They've got so some of the lore from like Clan Eshin, like I was saying, those four clans. Eshin are all assassins. Molder are the people who make mutants, so rat ogres.
Yes.
Pestilence are the people that are, as you would assume, obsessed with pestilence.
Yeah, of course.
And Skaven is typically associated with pestilence, because like dwarf holds will get infected with a giant plague, and it'll be because of pestilence, because they're just sitting there with their little rat claws, like
just lurking underneath it. That's
little eyes peering out.
God, that campaign's gonna be fun, man. It's gonna be
it's gonna be so good. It's gonna be so good. And there's got the last clan Skryre or whatever the hell.
Yeah.
They're all associated with the technology and like the weaponsmiths. So
yeah,
they're the ones that create all the stuff. But
man,
you've got a lot of really cool diverse units in Skaven with a lot of character, in the same kind of way that the Greenskins got a lot of character.
Right.
Their Doom Divers are literally throwing goblins with little kites on them. Yeah. That's hilarious. That's the same kind of dynamic.
It's going to be great. So, I mean, it sounds like from what you're saying is like, I mean, again, poison and pestilence is very, big with them. So I assume they're going to have a lot of, maybe kind of a infantry with the stalk mechanic that, again, are going to be stealth until very close. And then on top of that, they're also going to have poison attacks. And again, it sounds also like maybe lightly armored, like large monstrous units with the rat ogres that, again, are kind of like giants or, trolls or perhaps, some of those type units, you would say?
I would think so, because the cool thing about those rat ogres is basically like handlers.
Yeah.
And if like the handler gets killed, the rat ogres go fucking crazy. So because if their master gets killed, they rampage and go to town. So that could be a really cool dynamic. They've got like plague sensor bearer people that basically walk around with globes.
Yeah.
Think of it almost like blast charging miners with dwarves.
Yes.
So these guys that would throw poison grenades instead.
Yeah.
Or Warplock Giselles, which are basically units of 2, and they have these long ass muskets that are extremely armor piercing. So you've got a lot of tools that this army can use in a lot of different and crazy ways. So it's going to be definitely something entirely new to the Warhammer world that doesn't really play like any of the other armies, but has a lot of the mechanics that the other armies do, in the sense that it's got heavy counters for everything.
Yeah, I love the mad scientist vibe. Like, it'd be really interesting to see if they have like those high-powered warp cannons, like you were saying, and if there actually is like a mechanic in the Total War gameplay that like they can backfire or like damage themselves, kind of like similar to perhaps an overcast mechanic. That would be really fun. And the same with like the rattling gun, and if they can just like explode, man, that would be so fun.
I'd be surprised if they did, because the Chaos Hell Cannon has a similar mechanic where it can start rampaging and going towards the enemy on its own.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if they're going to do something like that, but I think that at least it'd be fun to have it in there.
Yeah, that's Skaven sound like they're going to be a pretty good time. And so again, you said that them and the Lizardmen have a bit of a rivalry. Mm-hmm. And as far as like some other factions, of course, you had speculated on the Dark Elves as well. And logistically, just to remind everyone, where are the Dark Elves on the map compared to these other factions that we just discussed?
So, and that was one thing I wanted to talk about. Skavenblight, which is the capital of Skavendom, is right at the very end of the Vault Mountains. So it's in the old world, and it's in between Tilia and Australia. So it gets me to wonder if they're not gonna touch Skavenblight, which is already physically in the game. You can see it on the map, and you look on the map in game, there's a blank spot. So you're like, what's that gonna be? So I'm not sure how they're gonna do. That's why I keep my conspiracy theorist tinfoil hat slides on slowly, and I say Southlands. But it would also make more sense it would also make a lot of sense if they did Lustria.
Yes.
Steaming jungles.
They gotta go there, man.
But north of Lustria on North America, let's just call it North America, because it's easier to visualize for a lot of the viewers that haven't seen a map. North America at the eastern end, so pretty much where the 13 colonies are, and also like the bottom portion of Canada there. Yes. That's where Nagaroth is, which is where the Dark Elves all hail from, which is a portion of Ulthuan that is moved up, that is departed from Ulthuan, which is a island off that coast, which is where all the High Elves are. So if they wanted to do a DLC to add High Elves and they had the New World in it, it'd be easy. If they wanted to do a DLC that would add High Elves in the Southlands, it'd be even more easy, because the Southland is dotted with elven fortresses, the Fortress of Dawn, Tor El Asor, Tower of Stars, which are all High Elf keeps. And even in Lustria's southern peak, the High Elf Citadel of Dusk is like a major port. So there's ways you can get High Elves into this without being in Ulthuan, which is really cool to me too, I think.
Got it. Okay. And as far as like general lore and what are the Dark Elves like all about? I mean, obviously, thematically and Dragonlance or Dungeons and Dragons, I mean, Dark Elves are always pretty sinister and evil and malicious. I mean, I'm assuming they're the same way in Warhammer, as, the tropes are pretty traditional. Is that correct?
Yeah. So, and that's a cool thing to bring up. Warhammer is like the second or third like real fantasy world to have been ever created. You've got Tolkien creating the first one with Lord of the Rings, Dungeons and Dragons coming out, and then you've got Warhammer. So those tropes play in very heavily to the Warhammer, because they're some of like, the progenitors of those tropes.
Yes.
And the Dark Elves, I had a train of thought I was on, and then I jumped off of it. So let me get back. Thought choo-choo.
Oh, no worries.
The Dark Elves are basically a faction that has split from the High Elves. All of Elfdom used to be united under one race called High Elves. The High Elves used to inhabit the old world where Athel Loren is. And I know a lot of people are wondering what's the difference between Wood Elves and Dark Elves, and I'm definitely going to get there, because the Wood Elves play entirely different than Dark Elves. But during the War of Vengeance, which is the big war between the Dwarves and the High Elves, all of the High Elves had to retreat back to Ulthuan, because there was just a pretty damn bloody war. It diminished both races heavily. So they retreated back to Ulthuan, and then around then is when you've got the Dark Elves at this point have already split off because the Dark Elves are what caused the War of Vengeance. The Wood Elves stay in Athel Loren, and then you've got Ulthuan, which is where the High Elves remain. That's why you get these three main elves. And the Dark Elves are basically the elves that followed Malekith, who is the son of Anarion. An Anarion being basically like the first Phoenix King is what it's called. And the Phoenix King is this guy who goes to this Phoenix Gate, and Asurion, their god, goes, "Yep, thou art worthy," and you become this Phoenix King.
Yeah.
Malekith goes to go through it, gets burned from head to toe, and is cast out. And then he says, "No, I'm still the king." They say, "No, man, that gate just burned you like a fucking crisp." So he separates Nagaroth from Ulthuan, and then wages basically a civil war that goes on for centuries. And in the end times, it comes about that like actually there was a test from Asurion and all this other garbage that destroys the Warhammer world. But still, the Dark Elves of Warhammer world are sadistic. They're into pleasure. They sacrifice other races, other high elves to their god Cain. Which is all like involved in like blood sacrifices, blood orgies.
Sounds very similar to like a chaos god.
Slaanesh, yeah. So there's a chaos god Slaanesh, 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 who is the god of pleasure.
Sure.
And a lot of dark elves are kind of considered Slaaneshi worshippers too at the same time. I think there's actually one unit of dark elves that is Slaaneshi corrupted. I can't remember the name of them. They're a rare unit. They're not maybe it's the Doomfire Warlocks, but
some sort of funny business.
Yeah, like it might be the Sisters of Slaughter. I don't remember. But basically, like, yeah, they're dedicated to Cain, but they also kind of at the same time are very similar to Slaanesh. And a lot of elves in general fall victim to Slaanesh because he is the god of pleasure, and elves in general in the Warhammer world from other races are regarded as very emotional.
Sure.
But the Dark Elves play very similar to, not very similar to Empire in the sense that they have weak core units, but very similar in the sense that they've got, they're very much a toolkit army. They can play against anything. If they want to be shooty, they've got some of the best archers in the land because they've got repeating crossbows that just keep plunking arrows into people. Yeah. They've got bolt throwers that will skewer through whole lines of infantry. They've got these dark shades, which are skirmisher units that have really high ballistic skills and can, again, repeater crossbows. And they've got skirmisher on horseback units that are ranged as well as melee.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to play a cavalry armor. You've got knights on cold ones, which are literally, like I was saying, men on lizards. You've got chariots. You've got those skirmisher guys I was talking about. So you've got a lot of answers to everything in this army. You've got a lot of beasts, which is the difference between high elves and dark elves. Is high elves or dark elves has a lot more actual beasts of war, like hydras and harpies. They've got their black dragons. They've got manticores. So they have got what's it called? Dark Pegasi. So they've got a lot to offer as far as beasts go. They're, again, very very diverse. They have very, very strong special infantry, some that are extremely heavy armored that can take a beating, and some that are a little bit lighter armored but can just swing for the fences at all times.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like they got a little bit from all the factions. I mean, with the Pegasi, and then of course they probably have fairly units that are somewhat similar to Eternal Guards, who again have high leadership, armor piercing, anti-large. And then they have units that are similar to War Dancers, but on that same coin, they also have like very powerful skirmishers and strong cav and then good monstrous units. So it sounds like, and they're probably also going to have a stock type mechanic, right, as well, like some sort of stealth incorporation in their army.
Well, yeah, they do have assassins, and those dark shades I was talking about are kind of assassiny too.
Yes,
but I don't think that they're going to have too much of that.
Okay,
because the assassins are independent characters. And the dark shades are more like Way Watchers.
Oh, okay.
Not in the sense Way Watchers are a little more range. These guys have crossbows, so they don't have huge range on them.
Yeah, but they hit hard and probably have pretty heavy AP, I would imagine, right?
Yeah.
That's gonna be cool. Yeah, it's gonna be really fun.
And again, they have amazing casting because they have access to dark magic, which is great in and of itself. And their lords are going to be their lords. So the Wood Elves don't really have a strong core of infantry. Like their infantry, aside from Eternal Guard, is pretty weak.
Sure.
These guys have a diverse either heavy infantry or light infantry with heavy AP. Like I said, very diverse. Their lords in the tabletop can be very awesome because you can load them up with a lot of magic items, and they're very fighty. Whereas the Wood Elf lords are not. You don't typically take a Wood Elf lord to be fighty. You take it to be ranged and badass, and basically like a walking ballista.
Sure.
Which you can also do with these guys, but not as well as Wood Elves, obviously.
That's that's the differentiating factor, essentially.
Yeah, you're looking at more of a toolkit army versus more of a predominantly range hit and run army, harassment army, like Wood Elf is.
Yeah, they sound like they're going to be pretty cool. And just when you were touching upon the initial lore, with the War of Vengeance, it sounds very similar to like the Tolkien universe. How the elves and the dwarves used to be very powerful races who are kind of fading into antiquity as like the men and the orcs and those other factions are coming into power. So pretty cool to see that kind of thematic there as well.
Oh, definitely. That's like a big thing with all these races. Like you've got the humans and Bretonians all like starting to vie for power and get big, whereas like all the elves and dwarves are like in the twilight of their empires, and their empires are still pretty huge, which is crazy.
Yeah. That's pretty great. And I mean, speaking of kind of an old ancient power, you were kind of speculating that the Tomb Kings could potentially be the fourth race in this as well, correct?
Yeah, so if they do Southlands, it would make sense that the Tomb Kings would be in it because the Land of the Dead is right there, and that's something that's been speculated for so long. I don't know if it will be, if that'll be the case, and if it will come to fruition. I'd say like of all the races, I probably know less about the Tomb Kings than most, but the Tomb Kings are really awesome because they have a really cool, rich history, very similar to like Egyptian history.
Yes,
and they play in well with Nagash because like Nagash used to be a high priest of Khemri, which is like the capital of Nehekhara, which is the Tomb King's Land of the Dead. And he casts this like giant spell that makes all the dead rise up. And he wasn't able to complete the spell before he was assassinated. And because of that, all of these dead still retain their sentience and still are alive. Like all the priest kings, they still have their minds, their memories, everything. Willpower was attack, which is not like the undead we see in vampire accounts, which are thralls. They're all bound to the will of their necromancer or to their vampire. So the big difference here is they have a different kind of leadership mechanic than vampire accounts.
Okay.
And they have more. It's not that they've got more beasts, but they've got different types. They actually have skeleton archers. They've got skeleton spearmen. They've got heavily armored skeleton spearmen. So they have more of a typical rank and file army, similar to like an empire, with like these giant sphinx beasts. These giant like I can't even remember the name of them, but they're like basically giants that are undead. Undead giant, I think actually maybe the damn name of it. Me being an idiot right now. But
so as far as like in Total War Warhammer, for example, the vampire counts, as you kind of speculated on the leadership mechanic, they do crumble. That's kind of how you kill a lot of those very tanky vampire counts units, is they do eventually start to crumble due to leadership issues. So that's probably not going to be a factor at all when the Tomb Kings are introduced, correct?
And that's what I'm trying to remember is if they have like the crumbling mechanic that that the vampire counts have. I don't recall if they do or don't, because again, I'd say this is the only army book I never owned for some weird, stupid reason. But if anyone in the comments or anyone listening to this can make a comment about it, let me know either way. From what I remember, I do not think that they do, but again, they get like a lot more diverse and structured army setups with like their Bone Kings and the such like that.
Okay.
So they've got a little bit more going for them than just say vampire counts who are playing basically their lords centered around a very strong special unit such as like Graveguard or Blood Knights.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting. So, for aesthetically speaking, they do look undead. They're skeleton like and kind of zombified, embalmed, kind of Egyptian thematics there. But they are going to be, as they do have their wills retained. So you're saying even their rank and file, like their standard infantry, still do have their will, though they are kind of in a state of undeath.
It's mainly their priest kings that can control everything, because the leadership mechanic still resides off those priest kings, but they kind of have that same mechanic where they can like Invocation of Heck, where they can keep raising their own units back up. They can do the same thing.
Okay.
Whereas, like, okay, you've got vampire counts, you've got like Nagash or all the von Karsteins. The big guy for Tomb Kings is Cetra. He's like the leader of all of the Tomb Kings. Cetra the Imperishable is his name, and he's kind of like the big guy pre Nagash, and the guy post Nagash who becomes like the leader of it all.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see how they do that. In terms of like because again, the vampire counts do have that crumbling mechanic, and it's kind of a staple of their army that they'll keep fighting until they crumble. It'd be really interesting because again, you said that the Tomb King kind of leadership. Again, they do, of course. I'm not that the vampire lords don't have their own will, but it'll be interesting to see how they differentiate those two factions, or if they just have very similar mechanics in terms of their leadership. Do they route those type of things? That'll be. I'm eager to see that.
Yeah, and that's again like someone can definitely comment to let us know either way how that really works out. Me being someone who hasn't collected them, I can say that they do have a lot of really crazy units. Like they've got like these really cool like Ushabti, these war sphinxes like I was talking about.
That's awesome.
So they do have a pretty diverse roster, which is basically the not the anecdote, but I guess you could say like the tagline for the Tomb Kings is Jack of all trades, master of none, because they've got so many different ways of doing things. Like these Ushabtis who can carry these giant bows who basically shoot like bolt throwers, or you can give them like 2-handed glaives to just cut through people. Those are monstrous infantry too. Yeah. So they ignore armor and can just like slam fuck things.
Just gorilla pound them.
Yeah.
Do it.
Didn't do it. But that's again, all the races that we're going to be seeing in this new expansion, no matter what they choose to put into it, Lizardmen, High Elves, Dark Elves, Skaven, Tomb Kings, it'll all be really rich and different, and it'll be a really nice breath of fresh air. So if they put any of those four in, I mean, they could even put the Chaos Demons, which would all play very differently because they all have like different mechanics. It's going to be something that's going to be really new for all the Warhammer Total War players, because I think they're going to have to learn a new set of tactics, or at least they will be able to apply what they know from some of their favorite armies into this and learn new tactics from armies they maybe don't play.
Yeah, I'm pretty rock hard about it. It's gonna.
Oh, dude, I've been hitting the bottom of my desk with it so hard.
Just full mast, dude.
I'm all flags are setting sail here.
Yeah, so this Friday, man, it's gonna be exciting. And I mean, just with to kind of conclude on the tinfoil hat conspiracies, do you think there's any other factions that could perhaps make their way in that kind of people aren't thinking of, or any wild cards in there?
Some
ogres.
I was gonna say the only other thing really is ogres, but they're in the Darklands, which is the mountain range that separates Old World with the Darklands. So the very far eastern portion, you go over that, you've got the Darklands. The majority of them are there. I mean, there's some Lizardmen, the Dragon Isles there, so like, oh, maybe City of Spires is over there. But what I'd be interested in, the biggest thing I think would be kind of like oh shit, wasn't expecting that, is in between the Southlands and the Badlands, there's a place called Araby. You probably can't guess what it's in there, but I promise you it's Arabian themed humans. They might do something with them, and that would be very new, because I think Araby was part of the Warhammer world back when they had rogue traders in like the late 80s and early 90s. I don't know. I don't know if they ever really did anything with the Araby.
Yeah.
There's another land called Nippon on it's the farthest east portion of the Warhammer world, and that's like samurai themed.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's like Nippon. It's like just straight up Japanese.
Exactly.
Just Arabian Nippon. I love it.
Well, so Clan Eshin, like I was talking about, goes to
the rats, correct?
Yeah, the rats, the Skaven.
Yeah.
They go to all the way to the far east to Nippon and to Cathay. Oriental Cathay is what it's called, and with the Tower of the Rising Sun and all that crap, and they learn how to basically become ninjas from those people.
So rat ninjas?
Yep. That's what Clan Eshin looks like. They're like rat ninjas. They're like assassin rat ninjas. They've got gutter runners, and there's like Night Stalkers or some shit.
You're just going to straight up have like Splinter from Ninja Turtles in there?
Dude, honestly, like one of the Clan Eshin ones looks straight up like Splinter with like a hood over his eyes.
He just has like a staff and just all
dude,
wise.
Just this fucking like knife dripping like blood and pus. Ooh,
dude,
ooh.
It's gonna be so much fun. Oh man, yeah. And I have a feeling with those sub factions you just mentioned, like Araby, If I don't know if I'm saying that correct, but I have a feeling they'll kind of get a similar treatment to like the Border Princes, where they do exist
Yeah,
in the game,
yeah.
but like they're not going to be like really playable. Maybe just like a sub faction you run into in campaign, perhaps.
That's what I think too. And if they do Lustria, they'll definitely have like Mousillon used to be an actual faction that you could never really play it, but it's there to harass you because it's part of that area.
Right.
The Vampire Coast would be one in Lustria, or there's Amazonian women in Lustria. So that's a faction of humans you could feasibly have that you would never play, but it will be there for flavor. So there's definitely a lot of those little things. Like the Southlands has a lot of forest goblins and savage orcs. So you would definitely have greenskins in the Southlands.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Man, sounds like so much fun. Pretty hype, man. We're just gonna have to go balls deep in some co-op campaign when this stuff comes out.
Oh man, absolutely. We'll probably unfortunately have to abandon our orc co-op campaign.
Hopefully
because
we can finish before then.
I don't know, man. I don't know when that game's gonna come out. Like I want it tomorrow.
I know, man. I know. Hopefully we can get some sort of early access. That would be incredible.
I know. Hey, Creative Assembly, if you're listening, give us that early access, yo. We'll put up some sweet NDA breaking videos.
Yeah, it'll be excellent. But yeah, man, it's some great stuff. Thanks for all your insight on the tabletop, how it might correlate to Total War Warhammer, all the lore. Some good stuff, man. It's some good stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for asking me some questions as someone who doesn't know a ton about the tabletop. It's always fun to kind of flex that knowledge, even though it's waning in some places, but for the most part, it's built off of 15 years of nerdom.
And also, guys, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're going to be doing like a Lizardmen specific lore video in the next few days, correct?
Yeah, I'm going to hopefully try to get that out here before the full launch, or about right on time with it, so that you guys can definitely jump into the softer side of the Lizardmen and learn a little bit more about where they come from, who the old ones are, how they're kind of in like the grand plan for saving Malice.
Yeah, man, that's going to be cool. Well, yeah, thanks again, guys, for watching. And if you haven't already, go check out Italian Spartacus. It's his channel name. It's all one word. Go subscribe. Just get balls deep in his channel, and we're going to keep having the good times, guys.
Yeah, guys, sub up, and thanks for joining us.
Thanks, guys, and have a great night.